An extraordinarily rare and extremely significant archaeological discovery has been unearthed in Jerusalem.
For centuries, the Temple Mount has stood at the crossroads of heaven and earth, a place where faiths collide, empires fall, and mystery refuses to die.
The Temple Mount has long been considered to be a portal to heaven. It is said that when the patriarch Jacob rested one night, he placed stones on the ground, and there he saw a ladder ascending to heaven.
Hidden beneath its ancient stones lies a story the world was never meant to see. But now, with cutting-edge AI scanning deep below the sacred ground of Jerusalem, science has started to pull back the veil. What it found could change everything we thought we knew, and it's time you saw it for yourself. The hill no one dares to touch. Picture a stone platform about 35 acres wide, roughly the size of 35 football fields, sitting inside the old city of Jerusalem. On top of that platform stand two landmarks the entire planet recognizes: the silver-gray Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock with its bright gold dome. This whole raised area is known in Arabic as Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, and in Hebrew as Har Habayit, the Temple Mount. Muslims can pack its open courtyards with hundreds of thousands of worshippers during big prayer days. For Muslims, it's the third holiest place in the world. For Jews, it's the holiest place in the world. And for many Christians, this is sacred ground too. For Jews, this is the spot where the first temple, often called Solomon's Temple, once stood in ancient Israel. Later, after that first temple was destroyed, the second temple stood on almost the same footprint. That second temple was rebuilt and massively upgraded by King Herod more than 2,000 years ago. He brought in huge teams of workers, leveled bedrock, and built giant retaining walls of cut stone to hold up a flat platform that ended up covering about 36 acres. That made it, at the time, the biggest sacred courtyard in the ancient world. That temple was not just a synagogue. It was the center of Jewish worship, sacrifice, law, and national identity. According to Jewish belief, the deepest inner room of that temple, the Holy of Holies, was the one point on earth where God's presence rested in a direct, intense way. That inner room was so holy that in ancient times only one person could enter it. Only the high priest could go in, and only once a year, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Because of how intense that holiness is said to be, many major rabbinic voices today, including Israel's chief rabbis, tell religious Jews not to walk on most parts of the Temple Mount at all. Nobody is 100% sure exactly where that Holy of Holies stood. If you step in the wrong place in the wrong spiritual state, you might be stepping on the most sacred square of ground in Judaism without the proper ritual purity. Ritual purity here means a spiritual, clean state that, in classic Jewish law, you only get after certain steps, including rituals that cannot be performed today, like a specific purification using the ashes of a red heifer. For Muslims, this same platform is Al-Aqsa, the farthest mosque, the place where the Prophet Muhammad is said to have been brought on a night journey and then raised toward heaven. That story of the night journey, told in Islamic tradition, is why this is counted right after Mecca and Medina as one of the top 3 holy places in Islam. The Dome of the Rock, built in the late 6th century AD, stands over the foundation stone, a rock Muslims link to creation itself and to the Prophet's ascension. The gray-domed Al-Aqsa Mosque at the southern end of the platform is one of the oldest mosques in continuous use anywhere on Earth. This entire plaza is not just a religious site, it's also a core part of Palestinian identity and pride. Christians point here too. The second temple, the same one Herod expanded, is the temple where Jesus was presented as a baby, where he later taught crowds, and where he confronted money changers. The huge outer courts, known in Christian tradition as places where all nations could gather, are described in the Gospels as a space where he healed people and preached. After Rome destroyed that temple in 70 AD, early Christians kept visiting the spot because they saw it as the stage where Jesus had challenged corrupt power and predicted that the temple would fall. Here's why this matters so much today. You don't just have one community saying, "This is ours." You have 3 global faiths, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian, all tying their story of God to the same 35-acre platform. You also have millions of people, from Gaza to Texas to Jakarta, who feel deeply connected to what happens on that hill, even if they've never been there in person. Because of that, even a tiny physical change, like adding a new staircase or drilling a test core into the paving stones, can blow up into a street riot, a diplomatic crisis, or worse. We've watched police raids inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque trigger rocket fire from Gaza and Lebanon within hours. We've watched arguments over who may pray where spark regional outrage. That is how sensitive this ground is. Now let's talk about who actually runs the place. In June 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel captured East Jerusalem from Jordan, including the Old City and this holy platform. Israeli troops were suddenly standing on the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, for the first time in modern Israeli history. But almost immediately after the fighting, Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan made a call that shaped everything that came after. Dayan ordered that Muslim religious control on top of the platform would stay in Muslim hands. Day-to-day authority over the mosques would not go to Israel, but to an Islamic trust known as the Waqf. The Waqf answers historically to Jordan and claims custody over the compound, meaning it handles cleaning, repairs, who can pray, and what work is allowed under the domes. From the Waqf's point of view, the whole 35-acre plaza is a holy space, not just the buildings. In Arabic, Al-Haram al-Sharif is treated as one giant sanctuary, so if someone outside the Waqf shows up with drills or ground sensors, the Waqf doesn't see research. They see somebody else trying to stick tools under their mosque and challenge their guardianship. Israel, on the other hand, controls the outer security. Israeli police and border police decide who gets through the gates and when. If tension is high, especially during sensitive days like Ramadan for Muslims or Tisha B'Av for Jews, Israeli forces can limit how many worshippers come in from the occupied West Bank, or they can escort Jewish visitors through the compound under heavy guard. There's another rule baked into this status quo. Jews and other non-Muslims may visit the platform during certain hours, but open prayer by non-Muslims on top of the mount is officially banned. Israeli leaders say this ban exists to avoid turning this into a religious war. The Western Wall, just below the mount, is presented as the main Jewish prayer site, while the mount itself is kept under Muslim worship. So you can see why archaeology here is like handling a bomb. On most ancient sites, digging is science. You pull pottery, log walls, and write reports. On this hill, digging is a statement. Imagine someone uncovers a stone carved with ancient Hebrew writing and says, "Look, proof a Jewish temple stood exactly here." From the Jewish and Israeli nationalist side, that stone could be used to say, "This land was ours 3,000 years ago." From the Muslim and Palestinian side, that same dig might look like an attempt to erase an Islamic shrine that's been standing on that platform since the late 6th century AD and is tied to the Prophet's night journey. Put all that together and you end up with this reality. The Temple Mount is basically a no-dig zone, but people still tried to learn what was down there. In the late 1800s, long before Israel, before Jordan, back when Jerusalem was under the Ottoman Empire, a young British army officer named Charles Warren showed up. He was only in his late 20s, sent by the Palestine Exploration Fund out of London. He couldn't start hacking into the sacred platform. That was off limits even then. So he went around the edges and underneath the ancient city. He lowered himself by rope into cracks in the bedrock. He crawled through tight rock-cut tunnels by candlelight. He mapped passageways and water shafts under the old ridge just south of the holy platform, the area often called the City of David. He and his team even climbed a natural vertical shaft about 40 feet deep, dropping down to the water of the Gihon Spring. That shaft is now famous. People still call it Warren's Shaft. Warren's work in the 1860s proved something huge. He showed that ancient Jerusalem isn't just ruins on the surface. It's also an underground maze cut into solid rock. He found carved tunnels, hidden drops, and stone-lined passages that let people in very old Jerusalem reach fresh spring water without exposing themselves to enemy arrows. In other words, long before modern armies or modern borders, this city was already thinking in layers: streets and worship up top, secret lifelines below. His maps drew some of the first sketches Europeans had ever seen of what lies under the old city's skin. But even Charles Warren, who was willing to dangle on ropes underground, hit a wall. The main platform of the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif itself, was untouchable. Local religious leaders would not let him dig into it. Ottoman officials would not sign off. He could measure around its outer walls. He could crawl underneath nearby streets. He could draw diagrams of blocked gates and old stone courses close to the edges. But the sacred platform itself? Closed. And that's how things stayed for more than 100 years. The hill sat there, carrying layer after layer of human story. Ancient Israelite kings, Roman legions, early Muslim caliphs, medieval sultans, crusading knights, Ottoman governors, British officers, Israeli police, and Jordanian guards. Everyone knows there are answers under that paving. Everyone knows that if you could read those layers like pages in a book, you'd get hard evidence about the First Temple, the Second Temple, the early Islamic period, all of it. But the rule has been, do not lift the stones. Then something happened that nobody planned. The dirt pile. That spilled secrets. By the late 1990s, something happened inside the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount that nobody expected. In a vaulted area long called Solomon's Stables, used today as the Al-Marwani Mosque, heavy machines cleared out old fill to make more space. There were no archaeologists supervising, no careful notes, no gentle brushes, just fast removal. Piles of soil and stone that had likely settled there for centuries were scraped up, loaded, and driven away. Within weeks, an estimated 9,000 tons, hundreds of truckloads, were dumped outside the old city, much of it down in the Kidron Valley. For scholars who had spent their careers told, "Don't touch this hill," it felt like the past had been scooped up and thrown out like construction trash. But that dump changed the game. The earth was no longer behind the red lines on the mount. It could be rescued. Two Israelis, archaeologist Dr. Gabriel Barkay and researcher Zaki Devira, decided to chase the lost soil. In 2004, with a permit and backing through Bar Ilan University and the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, they hauled thousands of sacks of that dirt to a controlled site in Jerusalem's Tzurim Valley National Park, a few minutes' drive from the old city. They called it the Temple Mount Sifting Project. The plan was simple. If you can't excavate the mount in the normal way, sift the dumped earth grain by grain. Every bucket would be washed over mesh screens. Every sliver of man-made material, pottery, bone, glass, coins, metal, tile, and ceilings, would be saved, labeled, and studied in the lab. People didn't just watch this work. They did it with their own hands. The project invited the public, and they came by the thousands. Families on vacation, school groups, tourists, soldiers, and retirees. Volunteers soaked buckets, sprayed down the mud, and picked through the grit, pebble by pebble. Staff archaeologists stood nearby to catch a find before it slid through the mesh. Over time, more than 200,000 people took part. Some counts say close to 250,000. It's hard to think of another research project where everyday visitors had such a direct hand in saving data. The scale of what came out is wild. As the months turned into years, the buckets yielded more than 500,000 artifacts. Tiny things, yes, but together they tell a thick story. The mix runs from the Iron Age, the era of the biblical First Temple, through the Second Temple period under Persian and Roman rule, then on to Byzantine Christian times, the early Islamic Umayyad period, the Crusaders, the Mamluks, the Ottomans, and modern debris from the 20th century. That spread alone shows constant human activity in and around the platform for roughly 3 millennia. Some finds hit like a timestamp from moments you've read about. The sifting has produced arrowheads that match types known from the First Temple era and the Babylonian conquest, the kind of bronze and iron points soldiers carried in the early 500s BC when Jerusalem fell. Later periods turn up too. Crusader arrows, horseshoe nails, and even bits of armor scales hint at medieval fights echoing through the same ground. Other finds are all about administration, names, offices, storage, and money. The project has uncovered clay seal impressions, called bullae. A bulla is a small lump of clay once pressed with a stamp to seal a cord or a bag. When the clay dries, it keeps nosy hands out and proves who closed it. Among the pieces from the sifting is a bulla, reading, Liahu son of Immer. The Immer family is known in the Hebrew Bible as a priestly clan that served in the First Temple's administration. That one thumbnail-sized lump of fired clay connects the earth from the mount to named people working in the temple's treasury system around the 7th to 6th centuries BC. Studies of dozens of bullae from the sifting, along with related finds nearby, point to real treasuries and storehouses handling silver, grain, and goods during Judah's last generations before the Babylonian exile. Coins pour in across eras. One especially striking piece from the sifting is a coin from the first Jewish revolt against Rome, with the ancient Hebrew slogan, "For the freedom of Zion." It dates to the years just before the Roman destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Seeing that phrase show up in rubble from the mount is like hearing a voice shout across 2,000 years. Someone brought that coin up there in the revolt era when the temple was at the center of the fight. Plenty of other revolt period coins, Roman imperial coins, and later coins also turn up in the sieves, lining up with known bursts of activity on the platform. The showstoppers for many visitors are the floors. Among the fragments pulled from the buckets are hundreds of pieces of stone floor tiles cut into precise geometric shapes, squares, triangles, and diamonds of different colors. The Latin term for this style is opus sectile, meaning cut work, luxury floors made by fitting polished colored stones into patterns. Working from those fragments, specialists reconstructed full designs and showed how Herod's renovation likely paved high-status porticos and courtyards on the Temple Mount with glossy, patterned stone. If you've ever seen Roman palaces or fancy villas with checkerboard floors, picture that, only scaled up for a massive sacred complex. The tiles even match sizes based on the Roman foot, about 11 6/10 inches. Another hint you're looking at Herodian period handiwork. A 10-year-old volunteer from Russia, Matvey Cheplyaev, spotted a tiny carved stone seal at the sifting station, a little cone showing one animal over another. It dates to the 10th century BC, early monarchic times. Not every object screams temple. Many are the quiet stuff of daily life. Cookpot sherds with burn marks, oil lamp fragments, bone from meals, worked stone chips, colorful bits of glass from later buildings. Even modern material, Jordanian coins, uniform buttons, and bullets, reminds you that the platform didn't freeze after the Romans. It kept changing with each new ruler and each new conflict. The project has had to adapt along the way. For years, the sifting took place at Zurim Valley National Park. In 2017, there was a pause as funding and administration shifted. In 2019, the team announced that full sifting of Temple Mount soil had resumed at a new facility on Mount Scopus, at the Masuat Lookout, and the Israel Antiquities Authority recorded the renewed work under its licensing system. Sifting the soil tells us what was once up there, but not where the rooms, halls, or reservoirs that once held those objects actually sit today. To figure that out, researchers have to look under and around the platform without touching it, using instruments that can see through stone. Scanning the forbidden ground. Around the mount and down along the western wall, you now see ground-penetrating radar, laser mapping, and even particle physics gear. All of this data then gets pushed through software, including artificial intelligence systems, to build a digital model of what's hidden, where it's weak, and how it all fits together. Let's start with ground-penetrating radar, usually called GPR. GPR works kind of like an ultrasound for dirt and stone. A small antenna on the surface sends very fast radio pulses down into the ground. When that pulse hits something different, an air pocket, a buried wall, or a change in bedrock, part of the signal bounces back up. The machine records how long that bounce took, which tells you how deep that boundary is. Then software slices those echoes into layers, like pages in a flipbook. When you stack those slices, you get outlines. Straight lines that look like man-cut walls, curves that look like arches, and dark zones that look hollow. Teams have dragged and rolled GPR all along the exposed stretch of the western wall and inside the tunnels that keep going past the prayer plaza. The western wall most people see in photos is only about 200 feet long. The full ancient wall runs for roughly 1,600 feet under today's old city, most of it buried under later buildings. You obviously can't drill through 2,000-year-old limestone blocks that people are literally praying against, so radar is the only way to peek behind them. What the conservation crews are doing is systematic, pass after pass of radar along the stone courses, noting places where the signal comes back weaker, which can hint at a crack or a gap behind the stone, and places where it bounces like a mirror, which can hint at something solid bracing it. In one published mapping run on the southern part of the wall, researchers documented 4,577 individual stones and measured how those stones sit on each other. That southern section alone is about 207 feet long and between about 57 and 95 feet tall. Why obsess over tiny changes in giant blocks? Because those blocks are old, and they weather in different ways. The western wall is built from huge limestone ashlars, some of them set in place in the time of Herod the Great in the 1st century BC. Some stones flake and crack faster than others, depending on the crystal size and the rock. Researchers built super-detailed 3-dimensional laser scans of the wall and then tested matching limestone from ancient quarries in the lab. They found that the fine-grained stuff can crumble almost 100 times faster than the coarse-grained stuff. That matters. If a block starts peeling, you're not just losing surface. You're risking a chain reaction in a wall that people stand under every single day. So the radar data, plus the laser scans, tell engineers where the weak points are and where to treat the stone to slow the damage before a block loosens. After each radar session, the raw echoes aren't pretty. They look like noisy streaks. This is where computers step in. The teams line up those streaks with earlier measurements, past surveys, and fresh laser scans to build cross-sections behind the wall. When you overlay pass after pass, you start seeing repeating shapes, long straight planes that act like buried retaining walls, or curved cuts that act like the backs of arches. You can also spot pockets that don't carry weight, which could mean an air gap or an old opening that was later sealed. Now picture what happens once you leave the open plaza and move under today's street level. North of the visible prayer area, there's a long tunnel system that runs along the hidden length of the western wall. It follows the buried continuation of that same massive support wall. Archaeologists and structural engineers have mapped those underground passages with high-resolution laser scanning and photogrammetry. Laser scanning, sometimes called terrestrial laser scanning or LiDAR, means you set up a tripod, fire millions of laser dots per second, and record exactly how long it takes each dot to bounce back. That gives you a three-dimensional point cloud, basically a digital copy of the space, accurate to within a few millimeters, which is about 1/10 of an inch. Photogrammetry is when you shoot hundreds or thousands of overlapping high-resolution photos and let software rebuild the surfaces in 3 dimensions from the way those photos line up. Why go to that level of detail? Because this is not a museum shelf. These tunnels are directly under homes, streets, prayer halls, and courtyards in the old city. They're exposed to humidity, heat, winter rain leaks, and even small tremors. A shift you can't see with your eyes, like a block moving the width of a fingernail, could mean pressure building in an arch. A slow drip in one corner could mean salt crystals growing inside a joint, which can pop a face off a stone over time. Conservation teams tied to the Western Wall Heritage Foundation now keep a kind of ID card on every single block in the prayer area, logging cracks, moisture, and repairs. The 3-dimensional scans feed that log. If a stone bulges or starts peeling, they see it in the model, not years later on the ground. There is another tool now showing up under the slopes just south of the platform. Cosmic ray muon imaging, also called muography. A muon is a subatomic particle that falls from space all the time. You can think of it like a heavier cousin of the electron. Muons fly straight through rock, but they slow down and get absorbed by thick, solid stone. If you put a detector underground and count how many muons come through from different angles, you can tell which directions are packed with dense rock and which directions are more open. In other words, you can map hollow space inside a hill without touching the hill. Muon imaging got famous a few years ago in Egypt. A group called Scan Pyramids used muon detectors to scan the Great Pyramid of Giza. They found a hidden void at least about 100 feet long, sitting above the Grand Gallery, the first new internal space confirmed in that pyramid since the 1800s. They later picked up a corridor roughly 30 feet long, about 6 feet wide, and 6 feet tall, near the pyramid's main entrance, and even slipped a tiny camera inside. Now that same kind of physics gear is being tested in Jerusalem. In 2024 and 2025, physics teams and archaeologists working in the area known as the City of David, the ancient ridge that drops down just south of the Temple Mount, set up portable muon detectors underground and started counting particle tracks in different directions. By tracking how many muons made it through, they were able to draw a 3-dimensional outline of underground cavities and solid rock layers under some of the oldest parts of the city. And they did it in one of the most politically sensitive places on Earth without drilling even 1 inch into a sacred floor. That is huge, because radar can struggle when the stone is very dense or very deep. Muons don't care. They keep flying, so muon imaging can reach farther under the hill than normal radar. All of this scanning throws off ridiculous amounts of raw data. A single laser session in a tight tunnel can capture tens of millions of data points. A radar run produces radargrams, those messy echo pictures. A muon detector logs particle hits from every angle for weeks or months. No single human can stare at that mountain of noise and make a reasonable conclusion. So researchers are leaning on artificial intelligence. Deep learning models, including image recognition systems called convolutional neural networks and UNet segmenters, are now trained to read radar slices, label strong reflections that look like human-made geometry, and filter out junk reflections from roots, modern pipes, or random rubble. Artificial intelligence also helps stitch different scans together. You can feed it a modern laser map of a tunnel, radar cross-sections taken through the wall next to that tunnel, and old survey sketches going back a century or more, and ask it to align them in 3 dimensions. The idea is to make one master model that shows where solid support is, where air is, and where stress is creeping in. On top of that, conservation crews can drop in current condition notes for each block, cracks, moisture, and salt bloom. So the digital model turns into a live health chart for the stone. So we're in this strange spot. For the first time, science can see under and around the Temple Mount without touching it. We now know there are straight walls under there, stacked stone courses, arch shapes, carved passages, and empty pockets that are not natural. We also know which stones in the exposed western wall are healthy and which ones are starting to fail, down to hairline cracks and salt blisters. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.